Hello, I hope that you are doing okay. Here's a story, Coat of Rushes. There lived a rich lord once in the East Country who had 3 daughters, of whom he was greatly proud. He was kind and generous to them, but he was also selfish and conceited, and delighted in nothing so much as flattery and praise. One day, being anxious to feed his vanity still higher, he called his 3 daughters and said to the eldest, "My child, how greatly do you love me?" "Why," she replied, "I love you as I love my life." "Well said," answered he, "and even as I wish to hear." Then he questioned the 2nd daughter, saying, "My child, how greatly do you love me?" "Why," she said, "I love you better than all the world." "Well said," cried her father, "and even as I wish to hear." Then, turning to his 3rd daughter, whom he loved best of all, he asked, "My child, how greatly do you love me?" And she, refusing to flatter his vanity by speaking anything but the exact truth, answered simply, "Why, I love you as our need is, which is even as fresh meat loves salt." At this, her father was exceedingly angry, for never had he been spoken to in such terms. "Since you do not love me at all," he cried, "you shall stay no longer in my house." And so he drove her out there and then, and shut the door after her. The poor girl wandered away and away, by forest and mountain, till she came to a country of fens, and there she gathered rushes and made them into a coat with a hood to go over her head and keep her from the cold. Then she went on her way until she came to the palace of the king and begged for work in the kitchen. "Surely you need an extra maid," she said. "No one else needed here," answered the cook. "I've nowhere to go," she said, "and I ask only for my keep with no wages, and I'll do any kind of work." "Well," answered the cook, "if you like to wash the pots and pans and scrape the saucepans, you can stay." So there she stayed and did all the dirty work, and because she gave no name, they called her Coat of Rushes. One day, not long after Coat of Rushes came to the palace, the Duke of a nearby duchy gave a great ball in his castle. To it went the prince, with all the grand lords and ladies of that kingdom, and many a prince and princess from neighbouring lands. And when all the work was done in the palace, the servants were allowed to go also, and admire all the great men and lovely ladies. But Coat of Rushes said that she was too tired to go, though really she was ashamed to be seen there in the rough garment she had made in the fen. Instead, she went out and wandered sadly by the fen, to sit and weep on the mound by which she had cut the rushes to make her coat. When she got there, however, she saw to her surprise that a doorway led into the mound, and in the doorway a fairy was waiting for her with a dress of pure silver. Quickly the fairy took the poor Coat of Rushes and dressed her instead in the silver garment, in which she seemed more beautiful than any princess. "Come back before the dance has ended," said the fairy, "and all will be well for you." So Coat of Rushes went to the castle in her silver dress, and none of the fine ladies was better dressed than she. No one recognized her at the ball, but the prince himself danced with her and fell in love with her on the spot. Before the ball was over, Coat of Rushes slipped quietly away, back to the fairy hill, where she changed out of her silver dress and was in her corner of the palace kitchen before the other servants returned, pretending to be asleep. Next morning they said to her, "Ah, Coat of Rushes, you missed a wonder last night." "What was that?" she asked. "Why, the most beautiful princess ever seen," they answered. "She came, no one knows from where, dressed all in silver, and the prince could not take his eyes off her all evening." "Certainly I should like to have seen her," she said. "Well, see her you may," they replied, "for tonight there is another ball, and perhaps she'll be there." When evening came, however, Coat of Rushes again said she was too tired to go with them. But when they had gone, she ran eagerly to the fairy hill, and there a dress was waiting for her, made all of gold. So off she went to the castle, and the prince was waiting for her and would dance with no one else all evening, and was deeper in love with her than ever. Again she slipped away before the end, and was pretending to be asleep in her coat of rushes when the servants came home to the palace. Next morning they said to her, "Well, Coat of Rushes, you should have been with us to see the strange princess." There she was again, dressed this time in gold, and the prince never took his eyes off her, nor danced with anyone but her. "Certainly I should like to have seen her," said Coat of Rushes. "Well, see her you can," they replied, "for tonight there is yet another ball, and maybe she'll be there." When evening came, Coat of Rushes was again too tired to go with the other servants, and do what they would, she insisted on staying at home. When they had all gone, however, she hastened to the fairy hill once more, and found waiting for her the most beautiful dress of all, made this time of the feathers of all the birds that fly in the air. When she had bathed in the brook and donned this glorious shining dress, Coat of Rushes went once more to the castle where the ball was being held for the third and last night. The prince was overjoyed when he saw her, and as before, he never took his eyes from her. He danced with her all evening, begging her again and again to tell him who she was and where she came from. She would tell him nothing, however, and when he despaired of learning, he gave her a golden ring, worked in strange secret patterns, and told her that if he did not see her again, he would certainly die. Nevertheless, she slipped away before the end of the dance, and though she stayed longer than usual at the fairy hill, she was back in the kitchen, curled up in her coat of rushes, before the other servants returned. Next morning they said to her, "Well, Coat of Rushes, you did not come to the castle last night, and now you may never see the wonderful princess, for that was the last of the balls." "Certainly I should like to have seen her," said Coat of Rushes as before. But there were no more balls, and so even the prince could not find his beloved princess, though he searched through all the lands round about and offered rich rewards to any who could bring him news of her. At last he fell ill, for he was pining with love for her, and was forced to stay in bed. He got worse and worse, and the king and queen grew very anxious, for he would scarcely eat a thing. "I must make some special gruel for the prince," said the cook, "for he is dying of love for the strange princess, whom he saw at the ball in the Duke's castle. "Let me make it," said Coat of Rushes. "I cannot do that," answered the cook. "It must be the best gruel that I have ever made." "Let me make it," begged Coat of Rushes. "I can do it in such a way that he will be cured for certain." At long and at last the cook let Coat of Rushes have her way, so she made a thin gruel, and, when no one was looking, she slipped into it the ring which the prince had given her. Then the cook took the bowl of gruel and sent it up to the prince, who drank it to the dregs. When he saw the ring at the bottom, he leapt out of bed and shouted to his guards, "Bring the cook before me at once." The cook was brought trembling before him, and he cried, "Who made this bowl of gruel?" "I did," answered the cook in great fear. "That you did not," shouted the prince. "Tell me at once who made it." "It was Coat of Rushes," gasped the cook. "She's the girl who washes the pans and scrapes the saucepans in the royal kitchen. She is so poor that her coat and hood are made of rushes. She begged me to make her let the gruel, saying that she knew a recipe which would be a certain cure for your Royal Highness's sickness." "Take away the cook and bring Coat of Rushes," commanded the prince. And when the girl in her rush clothes stood before him, he said, "Did you make my gruel?" "I did, your Royal Highness," she answered. "Where did you get this ring?" he asked. "From him that gave it to me." "Who are you then?" "I'll show you who I am," she replied, and flinging off her coat and hood of rushes, she stood before him in the wonderful dress made of the feathers of every bird that flies. Still she would not tell the prince who she was, but this made no difference to his love for her, and the wedding day was fixed for as soon as could be. Among the many guests invited to the great banquet was Coat of Rushes' own father. When she heard this, she went to the cook and said, "I want you to prepare every dish for the banquet without adding a single grain of salt." "No one will be able to eat it then," answered the cook. "That does not matter," she replied. "I dare not risk the king's anger," said the cook. "The blame shall be mine," Coat of Rushes assured her. Well, the wedding day came, and the prince married Coat of Rushes. Afterwards, they all sat down to the banquet, but the food was so tasteless that nobody could eat it. The proud lord, who was the father of Coat of Rushes, tried first one dish and then another. Then he burst into tears. "What troubles you?" asked the prince. "Alas, your Royal Highness," he answered, "I had a daughter, and I asked her how much she loved me. She answered, 'I love you, even as fresh meat loves salt.' Thinking that she had scorned me by making such an answer, I turned her from my door. But now I see that she loved me better than either of her sisters, and I have lost her. She may be dead for aught I can tell." "No, father," answered Coat of Rushes, "I am here." And she ran forward and flung her arms around him. And so they all lived happily ever after. The end. Thank you for listening. Have a lovely day or a pleasant evening. Take care of you.